Burke County, Georgia hid its secrets in the soft red clay that stained the roots of its oldest trees. Some were small, family scandals, debts, quiet affairs whispered through lace fans. But one secret festered long enough to rot through 3 generations. Between March of 1838 and September of the following year, 17 people died within the boundaries of Willow Bend Plantation, and not a single death record named what truly took them. Doctors burned their notes. The county clerk erased pages from the official register. When men from Savannah arrived months later to investigate, they found no witnesses willing to speak. Only a community united in silence. Beneath that hush, in the soil of one plantation, something unspeakable had taken root. The story began, as such stories often do, with a death that drew little suspicion. Wealthy planters in the Georgia lowlands fell ill often and died quietly. The heat, the whiskey, the parasites in the river, all could be blamed. Willow Bend's master, Thomas Rutledge, was no exception. His end would come with so little noise that it felt at first like just another line added to the county's long ledger of loss. Burke County stretched across the rich floodplain of the Savannah River, where the air shimmered with cotton dust and river fog. By the 1830s, its wealth was measured not in coin but in bales. 60 grand plantations fed the textile mills of England, and the town of Westboro, the county seat, glistened with the polished prosperity of empire. 3,000 souls lived there, bankers, ministers, merchants, and the enslaved who served them all. Church bells marked the rhythm of the week. Manners stood guard over every conversation. It was the kind of place where the hierarchy felt ordained, where God and prophet seemed indistinguishable. 7 miles southeast, Willow Bend rose on a curve of Turkey Creek. The house, a 3-story federal mansion of red brick and white columns, dominated the landscape like a relic from another country. 42 enslaved people worked the fields. 18 more ran the house, the stables, the smokehouse, and the looms. The estate had belonged to the Rutledge family since 1792, its bloodline traced proudly to English forebears. Generations of planters had ruled its acres with practiced gentility. Their wealth had weathered wars, floods, and bad harvests. They called themselves civilized. Their civilization rested, as always, on bones. Cordelia Vance became mistress of Willow Bend in 1820, a Charleston bride of 19 married to a widower 15 years her senior. She was the daughter of a shipping merchant whose fortune had faltered after the embargo years. Thomas offered her stability. She offered him a name still respectable enough to polish his own. Tall, striking, with dark auburn hair and eyes so pale they seemed colorless, Cordelia gave the impression of someone born to colder climates. Servants whispered that those eyes could see through walls. Within months of her arrival, she learned to run Willow Bend with military precision. She catalogued every sheet, every spoon, every servant's task. Over 18 years she bore 5 children: Margaret, Thomas Jr., Catherine, Edmund, and Elizabeth, each arrival noted in her ledger with the same steady hand she used to record the weather and the yield of the cotton fields. Neighbors found her capable but cold. Guests spoke of her dinner parties in reverent tones where French dishes appeared as if conjured, every course served on time. She was not known for affection, only for efficiency. Yet behind the closed doors of the master's house she wrote. Late into the night, long after lamps had gone dark, she filled journal after journal beneath the flicker of a candle. Her reading was not of fashion or poetry, but of medicine. Treatises ordered from Philadelphia and Charleston, heavy volumes with diagrams of organs and bones. A plantation mistress studying anatomy unsettled her peers. It unsettled her servants even more. They watched her walk the fields at dawn, inspecting the workers not like people, but like specimens. She asked strange questions about their families, their strength, their endurance. In those quiet mornings, a different kind of curiosity was awakening in her, one that would soon consume everything. Thomas Rutland seemed an ordinary planter by the standards of his peers. He rode the property each morning, managed accounts in the afternoon, and in the evenings drank his whiskey on the veranda, arguing politics with visiting neighbors. Every Sunday he filled the family pew at the Presbyterian church, his wife and children arranged by age like trophies of moral order. Few suspected the unease that lingered between husband and wife. After 1832, they stopped sharing a bedroom. Thomas claimed her late-night writing disturbed his sleep, though that excuse wore thin over time. He suffered chronic digestive ailments that no remedy seemed to cure. His physician, Dr. Silas Peaton of Westborough, treated him with calomel and laudanum, standard poisons of their day disguised as medicine. The complaints worsened year by year, though the doctor found nothing to explain them. Among the enslaved at Willowbend were 3 men whose roles placed them above the field hands but not beyond Cordelia's gaze. Isaiah Drummond, the carpenter, was 32 and literate, his skill inherited from a father once prized in Virginia. Caleb Tucker, the blacksmith, was 28, tall and powerfully built, purchased from South Carolina for his craft. The third, Josiah Mercer, was 26 and had grown up in the house, the favored servant of Thomas himself. Each man held privileges rare for his position, private cabins, small earnings from outside work, and each bore, without their knowing its meaning, the same faint crescent-shaped mark on the left shoulder blade. That mark would one day be written in blood. By the winter of 1837, the frost bit deeper than usual. The Savannah River froze at its edges, and even the wealthiest houses smelled of damp wool and smoke. In the quarters, families burned scraps of wood to keep warm. In the big house, the fires roared endlessly, but warmth could not keep sickness out. Thomas grew gaunt, his skin waxy, his breath tinged with rot. Dr. Peaton came weekly, muttering about bile and imbalance, while Cordelia fed her husband broths and tonics she prepared herself. Her composure never cracked. On March 3, 1838, Thomas was found lifeless in his bed, the linens soaked with sweat. He was 52. The doctor declared it gastric fever, an easy explanation, one he had written 100 times before. Cordelia received the verdict with calm efficiency. No fainting, no sobs. Within hours she had organized the funeral, chosen the burial clothes, and written to relatives in Charleston and Savannah. The house was draped in black crepe. 3 days later, the Rutland patriarch was laid in the family plot behind the magnolias, beside his first wife. The county's elite gathered in solemn attendance. Cordelia stood veiled and motionless, her gloved hands folded neatly, her grief measured in silence. Only she knew that while the mourners wept, something darker had already begun. The morning after the burial, before the body's scent had faded from the walls, she descended to the root cellar beneath the kitchen house. Among the barrels of potatoes and onions, she unearthed a small wooden box she had hidden weeks earlier. Inside lay letters, receipts, and a journal bound in black leather. She read by the flicker of a single lamp, her expression unreadable, then sealed the papers again and concealed the box beneath the floorboard of her bedroom closet. The world would see a widow in mourning. Willowbend itself would become her laboratory. The next day, 3 men were called to the main house. Isaiah, Caleb, and Josiah entered the study that had once belonged to Thomas. Cordelia sat behind her, husband's massive mahogany desk, the drapes drawn against the morning light. She informed them that new duties awaited them, tasks that would require obedience and absolute discretion. She spoke with the stillness of someone reciting a plan already rehearsed 100 times. The words left no room for refusal. She told them they would meet her at dawn by Turkey Creek each day, and they would follow every instruction given to them. Disobedience would be met with punishment beyond imagining. Her gaze fixed on them one by one, grey eyes bright with knowledge that made their skin crawl. None of the men dared question. Slaves did not question the will of their mistress. But they felt something in that moment shift inside them. An invisible line crossed. Turkey Creek wound through the southern edge of Willowbend, a narrow artery of cold, spring-fed water that whispered through cypress roots and live oak shadows. In the half-light of dawn, it was beautiful, secret, alive with the hum of insects and the cry of distant birds. On March 7th, 4 days after the funeral, the first ritual began. Cordelia came, dressed in grey, carrying a linen bundle. The air smelled of wet earth and iron. The 3 men waited in silence, their breath misting in the chill. She approached the flat rock that jutted into the stream and set her bundle upon it. The men watched as she gave her instructions, her tone even, her face serene. They would all step into the water. They would remove their clothing. They would stand in a circle. They would speak to no one of what occurred here. Should any of them break that vow, they would be sold to the sugar fields of Louisiana, where men lasted 5 years at most. Beneath her threat lay something worse than fear, conviction. She spoke their names softly, each syllable deliberate, and it felt to them as if she were naming not their bodies but their blood. The creek's chill burned their skin as they entered. Cordelia undressed without hesitation, her pale figure stark against the fog. The men averted their eyes, ashamed and afraid. They formed the circle as ordered, water to their waists, the current threading cold fingers around their legs. Cordelia unwrapped her bundle, a razor, glass vials filled with clear liquids, strips of cloth, a small leather book whose pages fluttered in the damp air. She began to read. The words sounded like Latin twisted by another tongue, the rhythm steady, almost musical. She washed each man in turn, dipping water, pouring it down their shoulders, chests and backs, tracing patterns that felt ritualistic, though none could guess their meaning. One of the liquids stung the skin, leaving a faint smell of metal and herbs. When she finished, she washed herself in the same way, moving with the precision of someone performing surgery. Then came the cuts. Each man felt the bite of the razor at the same spot, the left shoulder, over the crescent-shaped mark they had never thought to question. She caught their blood on strips of cloth, mixed it with fluid from her vials, and pressed the mixture to her own chest, her voice rising into a chant. The creek rippled around them, indifferent witness to a crime that had no name. When it was done, she told them to dress, to go about their day as if nothing had happened. Tomorrow they would return. The command was final. They obeyed. For a long time after she left, they stood on the bank, shivering though the sun had begun to rise. None spoke. They went back to their tasks hollow-eyed, the memory already beginning to fade, like a dream slipping beneath consciousness. That evening, each felt the same strange heaviness in his chest, as if part of his strength had drained away. The ritual repeated the next morning, and the next, until it became as routine as sunrise. Some days she changed the order of the prayers, some days the cuts, but the pattern endured. Water, nakedness, blood, silence. By the second week, the changes began. Isaiah moved slower, his once sharp eyes clouded. Caleb's hands trembled at the forge. Josiah spoke less, his thoughts wandering mid-sentence. They became shadows of themselves, working by habit rather than intention. Rachel, a house servant who had known Josiah since they were children, said later that it was like watching a flame dim behind glass. He still looked like Josiah, but the man within was fading. Whispers spread through the quarters. Mistress Cordelia had taken to root work. She was stealing their souls, drawing power from their blood. Some said she had learned it from New Orleans, others from Charleston, where strange physicians whispered of forbidden cures. No one dared confront her. No one dared run. At Willowbend, obedience was survival. In the main house, the family noticed the changes too. Cordelia rose before dawn each day, her clothes damp when she returned, her mood bright and almost fevered. 10-year-old Edmund once asked where she went. She smiled faintly and told him she walked by the creek for her health. Margaret, 17 and sharp-eyed like her mother, saw through the lie. She saw the black leather book always kept close, even beneath her pillow. She saw the chemical stains on her mother's fingers. She saw the hunger in her gaze. One morning she tried to follow her, slipping out as the horizon blushed with light. Cordelia caught her just beyond the trees. The grip on her wrist left bruises. Whatever words passed between them were never written down, but that night Margaret hid in her room, trembling. In her diary, she wrote that her mother had become something unrecognizable, that there was a wrongness about her now, a scent like metal and decay. Spring pressed forward, relentless. The cotton fields brightened with new shoots. Cordelia managed every detail flawlessly, as if nothing were amiss. To the neighbors, she was the model widow, dignified, industrious, maintaining her estate until her son came of age. But in the solitude of her room, her candle burned long into the night. She filled her journals with meticulous notes, measurements of the men's pulse, their decline, her own renewed vigor. She wrote of the sensations in her body, the sense of strength returning, the clarity of thought that replaced years of fatigue. She wrote of bloodlines and corruption, of purity regained through suffering. Her handwriting grew jagged, the words fierce with conviction. Whatever compassion had once lived in her heart was being replaced by something colder, something that believed itself righteous. By May, the transformation could no longer be ignored. Isaiah stumbled through his work, his once brilliant craftsmanship reduced to clumsy effort. Caleb's steady hands could no longer shape iron. Josiah forgot simple orders within minutes. Their eyes were blank mirrors. Dr. Peaton, visiting to treat young Elizabeth's cough, noticed the men and asked Cordelia about their condition. She dismissed it as malaria. The doctor offered to examine them, but she refused with polite firmness. Still, his unease lingered. In town, he mentioned it to another physician over brandy, describing the vacant look, the trembling hands, the gray gums. A small thing, perhaps, but the kind of detail that can wedge into memory and wait for its moment to bloom into dread. The seed of suspicion had been planted. What grew from it would tear Willowbend apart. By June of 1838, the summer air in Burke County grew thick enough to drink. The evenings pulsed with the drone of cicadas, the scent of magnolia, and something sourer beneath, the slow rot of sickness spreading unseen. At Willow Bend, the rituals at Turkey Creek continued like clockwork, each dawn a quiet invasion of the natural order. What began as obedience had become compulsion. Isaiah, Caleb, and Josiah no longer resisted. They went because their bodies moved when commanded, their wills hollowed out by exhaustion and dread. The creek had taken more than their blood. It had swallowed their identities. One morning, Isaiah collapsed while repairing the plantation's cotton gin. His hammer fell from his hands, and he slumped forward into the dust. For several minutes, his chest barely rose. When he regained consciousness, confusion clouded his eyes. He asked what day it was, then forgot the answer before the sentence was finished. The overseer, Marcus Dequa, a man of harsh discipline but practical instincts, reported the incident to Cordelia. She visited the cabin, looked over Isaiah with faint irritation rather than concern, and ordered that he be kept on bread and water until he recovered. She called it drunkenness. Marcus knew that was a lie. Isaiah never drank, but said nothing. Even for an overseer, there were limits to how far one questioned the mistress of a great estate. 2 days later, the forge went silent. Caleb had fallen again, this time with iron still glowing on the anvil. He was found trembling, his words slurred, eyes unfocused. Like Isaiah, he was banished to his cabin, left to sweat through another so-called fever. The enslaved workers spoke in whispers that night. They believed Mistress Cordelia was draining the life from these men, stealing something sacred that no prayer could reclaim. The old woman Dinah, the healer from the Congo who had survived enough masters to know evil when it walked in daylight, made a small charm of roots and stones. She pressed it into Josiah's hand, pleading with him to keep it close. Josiah looked at her blankly and let it fall to the ground. Dinah wept quietly. She knew then that whatever had taken hold of him could not be undone by charms or prayers. Marcus Dequa tried to ignore the unease tightening around the plantation. He had served under crueler masters and witnessed horrors enough to turn any man cold, yet what he saw at Willow Bend gnawed at him. Cordelia's vitality seemed to bloom as her chosen men withered. Her skin looked younger, her step brisk, her posture regal again. The widow, who should have been fading under grief, now seemed electrified. He began waking before dawn, watching from the shadows as she walked the path toward Turkey Creek. Sometimes he saw the 3 men follow, moving in slow, unnatural synchronization. He never went close enough to witness the ritual itself. Something deep in his gut warned him not to. But each morning they returned looking emptier, and each morning Cordelia returned stronger. He began to keep notes, small observations scratched on scraps of paper. A man without proof was just a gossip, but a man with proof could survive what came next. Cordelia's journals from that summer, fragments of which would later surface in evidence, revealed how her mind had shifted from secrecy to conviction. She no longer wrote like a woman doubting her sanity. She wrote like a prophet documenting revelation. She described sensations in her veins, heat, lightness, an expanding clarity of thought. She believed the rituals were refining her body, purging weakness, strengthening her spirit. She referred to her subjects not as men but as vessels, their suffering proof of the process working. She wrote that their minds had become too clouded for conversation, but that she no longer required their comprehension. Their usefulness was physical, elemental. Her handwriting became uneven, words pressed deep into the page as if carved by force. She believed herself chosen for something greater. Meanwhile, whispers in Westboro began to reach the ears of the county's physicians. Dr. Silas Peaton, still troubled by what he had seen in May, discussed it with Dr. Francis Calloway over brandy in the back room of the inn. They debated whether some new malady had appeared among the enslaved population. Calloway thought it might be contaminated water. Peaton disagreed. The pattern was too specific. 3 men, all belonging to one household. He mentioned Cordelia's claim that she was treating them with quinine and calomel, yet he had seen none of the telltale blue discoloration those drugs caused. Something about her explanation rang false, but without evidence he could do nothing. In Georgia, a widow of Cordelia's stature could not be accused lightly. In Charleston, however, one man awaited her letters with obsessive interest. His name was Victor Kensington, a physician once respected, now notorious. 10 years earlier, he had been expelled from the Pennsylvania medical community after rumors of grotesque experiments at an asylum. He fled south and reinvented himself as a practitioner of vital transfusion therapy, claiming to transfer youth and vigor between bodies. Wealthy patrons paid handsomely for his promises. Most did not survive the cure. In 1836, Cordelia Vance Rutledge had sat in the parlor of a Charleston widow and listened to Kensington lecture on the mysteries of vital force and the conquest of decay. She had been captivated. She visited his office on Church Street 2 days later, where jars of preserved organs gleamed under oil lamps. There, Cordelia told him what she had never told anyone, that she believed her husband had betrayed her in ways that defied morality and reason. She suspected that at least 3 of her 5 children were not truly his. She spoke of faint memories of confusion, nights lost to fog, waking to the scent of strangers. Thomas, she believed, had arranged for other men to father her children, men from among his own enslaved workforce. She thought he had drugged her, humiliated her, all to hide his own sterility. Her voice, Kensington later wrote, trembled not with fear but with fury. She wanted vengeance, not confession. Kensington listened with the calm of a predator who recognized fresh prey. He told her what she longed to hear, that her suffering could be transformed into power. His methods, he said, could reclaim what had been stolen. The process required precision, secrecy, and faith. He would send written instructions, chemical compounds, and the invocations necessary to conduct the transfer. It would not be cheap, but Cordelia had means and motivation enough. She agreed to everything. Over the next 2 years, their correspondence deepened into conspiracy. Kensington's letters, later discovered in the hidden box beneath her floorboard, described elaborate procedures combining medicine and ritual. Cordelia was to select 3 male subjects reflecting those she believed had violated her, physically similar, strong, and bound to her will. She was to prepare them slowly with small doses of compounds mixed into their food, arsenic, mercury, and digitalis in quantities just shy of lethal. These would weaken resistance and make them compliant. Once her husband died, the true work could begin. Each morning at dawn, she would lead them into cold running water. She would perform bloodletting at precise locations, chant the invocations he had written phonetically, and apply tinctures to her skin mixed with their blood. The process, Kensington claimed, would transfer vitality through sympathetic resonance of the body's magnetic fluids. He described it as science, but it was madness draped in medical language. In truth, the chemicals ensured only slow poisoning. The chanting, the humiliation, the ritual stripping, all served to break the victim's sense of self. The more they surrendered, the easier it became for Cordelia to believe she was absorbing their strength. Kensington never cared whether she succeeded. For him, she was merely another experiment. A rich woman performing cruelty he could record from a distance. By midsummer, the transformation was undeniable. Cordelia glowed with restless energy while her victims decayed before her eyes. Isaiah barely spoke. Caleb's hands were raw and shaking. Josiah walked like a man half asleep. Their skin had turned a waxy yellow, their movements sluggish, their minds dulled beyond recognition. Even the overseer Marcus, hardened by years of brutality, felt a chill watching them. This was not punishment, it was disintegration. On July 14th, Cordelia received another letter from Kensington. He praised her diligence, urged her to intensify the treatments, and hinted that the transfer would soon be complete. She increased the doses, prolonging the creek sessions until the men's lips turned blue from cold. She began collecting not just blood but hair and sweat, mixing them with her chemicals to form ointments she rubbed into her skin. She wrote that her body tingled afterward, that she could feel the men weakening as she grew stronger. She believed she was reversing time itself. The heat that month was merciless. The air shimmered. The nights offered no relief. Even the crops began to wilt. The enslaved population moved through their work like ghosts, terrified of attracting notice. Cordelia's children avoided her eyes. Margaret, now certain her mother had lost her mind, tried writing again to her aunt in Charleston, describing what she had seen, the dawn walks, the stench of medicine, the hollow-eyed men. She sealed the letter in secret and entrusted it to a house servant bound for town. While Cordelia conducted her rites at Turkey Creek, Marcus made his move. One afternoon, when the mistress was entertaining visitors from Westborough, he crept into her bedroom. The scent of lavender could not disguise the faint chemical tang in the air. Beneath the floorboard in her closet he found the box. Inside were dozens of letters signed by Kensington, several of Cordelia's journals, and receipts from an apothecary in Augusta for mercury and arsenic. There was also an unfinished letter in Cordelia's own hand, confessing that she no longer knew whether the treatments were working or whether she had simply been murdering 3 men to feed a delusion. Marcus read enough to understand that what was happening at Willowbend was no ordinary cruelty. It was madness masquerading as science. He took several letters and one journal, replaced the box, and rode hard to Westborough that night. The man he sought was Howard Pritchard, an attorney known for ambition disguised as civility. Pritchard read the documents with growing fascination. To him, they were not evidence of murder but opportunity. Under Georgia law, the death of enslaved people held no criminal consequence. But the insanity of a plantation mistress, especially one managing an estate as valuable as Willowbend, was another matter. With the right presentation, Cordelia could be declared mentally unfit, her property placed under guardianship. Pritchard already knew men in Burke County eager to claim such a role. The profit would be immense. He advised Marcus to wait, to let Cordelia's behavior worsen before striking. The more dramatic her downfall, the easier their victory. But Pritchard was not the only one profiting. Kensington, ever the opportunist, had been selling copies of his correspondence with Cordelia to another buyer, none other than Pritchard himself. The attorney had learned of her through Kensington months before, funding the doctor's letters in exchange for reports of her progress. He wanted her broken completely, so her estate could be taken without resistance. Cordelia, convinced of her secrecy, had been surrounded by betrayal on all sides. When she returned home that evening, she knew instantly someone had disturbed her hiding place. The floorboard sat a fraction out of alignment. One scratch on the wood gave the intrusion away. She checked the box, saw the slight rearrangement of papers, and knew it was Marcus. No one else would have dared. Fury, cold and absolute, replaced fear. That night she dismissed him from his position, ordering him off the property before sunrise. Her voice carried no trace of panic, only the calm of a woman who believed herself still untouchable. She warned him that if he spoke lies about her, she would ruin him across 2 states. Marcus left under cover of darkness, with the stolen letters hidden in his saddlebag. Behind him, Willowbend seemed to exhale a breath of malice into the heavy night air. Without an overseer, discipline faltered. Cordelia promoted a driver named Samuel Gentry to fill the role, but the enslaved workers sensed her instability. They slowed their pace, feigned ignorance, whispered rebellion in the dark. She responded with brutal efficiency. Whippings, ration cuts, curfews. Fear returned to Willowbend like a second plague. And still, each morning she walked to the creek. The water ran cold even in July. Her reflection on its surface no longer looked like a widow's. It looked ageless. On July 28th, Isaiah Drummond died. He was found motionless in his cabin, his body thin as rope, eyes open as if still trying to understand what had been taken from him. Cordelia ordered his burial before sundown. No ceremony, no prayers. She recorded his death as fever and consumption. That night, she wrote in her journal that one vessel had been fully emptied, and the energy had flowed successfully. She felt rejuvenated, cleansed. She did not see it as a killing. She saw it as reclamation. The following days blurred into heat and silence. Caleb and Josiah lingered between life and death, their existence reduced to obedience. The creek remained their confessional, its water whispering the secrets it would keep for generations. In Charleston, Margaret's letter reached her aunt, and a new storm began to gather, one that would soon collide with Cordelia's crumbling empire. The reckoning had begun its slow, deliberate walk toward Willowbend. August 1838 arrived with the weight of thunder. The air hung still, swollen with heat and tension, and Willowbend Plantation, once a model of order and southern grace, had begun to unravel from within. Cordelia moved through its halls like a ghost queen presiding over her own decay, her beauty sharpened by madness. The walls whispered of her dawn rituals, of the creek that had swallowed more than one man's life, of the children who dared not look directly at their mother for fear of what stared back. Word of her strange behavior drifted beyond the property. Servants carried fragments of rumor to town. Talk of 3 enslaved men wasting away, of the mistress walking the fields before sunrise with wet hair and eyes that gleamed unnaturally bright. Letters began to move through careful hands, one from Margaret to her aunt in Charleston, another from Dr. Silas Peaton to a colleague describing symptoms he could not explain. These threads, fragile on their own, began to weave into a noose. By late August, forces were already converging. In Charleston, Catherine Vance, Cordelia's widowed sister-in-law, received her niece's letter and felt cold dread settle in her chest. She wrote immediately to Dr. Peaton, urging him to intervene, and to the county judge, warning that her sister-in-law had lost her mind. At the same time, attorney Howard Pritchard in Westborough gathered his evidence, the stolen journals and Kensington's letters, ready to present Cordelia's insanity as legal truth. He smelled profit where others saw tragedy. When Dr. Peaton arrived at Willowbend under the pretense of a family visit, he found what remained of Cordelia's subjects. Caleb lay on a cot, barely conscious, his gums dark with mercury poisoning. Josiah sat beside him, his eyes vacant, skin gray as ash. Their bodies bore burns, scars, and chemical stains. These were not the marks of illness, but of deliberate violation. The doctor confronted Cordelia, his voice trembling as he asked what she had done. She met his questions with chilling calm, explaining that she was curing herself of corruption, reclaiming the life her husband had stolen. The treatments were working, she insisted, proof written in the renewed strength of her own body. Peaton fled the plantation that evening and went straight to the courthouse. His report, combined with Marcus Dequa's stolen evidence and Pritchard's scheming, sealed Cordelia's fate. On September 3rd, the sheriff rode out with a court order declaring that Cordelia Rutledge would submit to medical examination for mental competence. She was not yet under arrest, but her rule was over. The examination took place 3 days later in the courthouse at Westborough. 3 physicians questioned her for hours. They found a woman articulate yet unmoored, speaking with reason while describing delusion. She defended her experiments as science, insisted her husband's betrayal had been real, that her work merely corrected a cosmic imbalance. Her composure faltered only when pressed about the men who had died. She spoke of them not as people, but as conduits, necessary vessels. The panel's decision was unanimous. Insanity brought on by delusional obsession. Cordelia was declared unfit to manage her affairs or care for her children. Catherine Vance arrived from Charleston soon after, assuming guardianship of the Rutland estate. She moved swiftly, silencing gossip and locking away everything that might further disgrace the family. Cordelia was confined to her room, forbidden the creek, the books, the bottles. The rituals ceased, but the damage was done. Isaiah was already buried. Caleb's body failed weeks later, collapsing under months of poison. Only Josiah survived, his mind a ruin, his memory erased. He lived another 8 years on the property, cared for by others who pitied him, but could not name what had been done. Investigators followed the trail to Charleston, where Kensington's office stood empty, his ledgers gone. What they uncovered instead were letters, proof that the physician had never believed in his own theories, that he had sold Cordelia's correspondence to Howard Pritchard for money and influence. The 2 men had manipulated her dissent, feeding her madness for their own ends. When exposed, Pritchard fled Burke County under threat of prosecution, his name whispered with contempt long after he vanished. Kensington simply disappeared, leaving behind rumors of new frauds in New Orleans and Havana. His victims scattered and forgotten. The deeper truth of Thomas Rutledge's deception emerged only later, pieced together from fragments of plantation records and the memories of the enslaved. Thomas had indeed been infertile, stricken in youth by an illness that left him sterile. But rather than drug his wife or arrange her violation, he had fathered children with enslaved women before his marriage. Children he kept at Willowbend as skilled workers. Isaiah, Caleb, and Josiah were his sons, half-brothers to Cordelia's own children. The resemblance she had noticed was real, but her mind, poisoned by grief and pride, had rearranged the facts into a vision of monstrous betrayal. She had killed the innocent to avenge an imagined crime. Cordelia never faced trial. In Georgia, the murder of enslaved people was not a crime that brought the gallows, only a matter of property loss. Catherine Vance used her influence to keep the matter quiet. In November 1838, Cordelia was committed to the state asylum in Milledgeville, where her name entered the register as widow, age 43, afflicted with delusional melancholia. She lived there 14 years, writing endlessly in journals that the attendants confiscated and burned. She died of pneumonia in 1852, calm and detached to the end, her children scattered. Margaret married a physician in Philadelphia and never spoke of Georgia again. Thomas Jr. sold Willowbend in 1856, choosing to erase it from the family's future. The younger children were raised on edited versions of the past, stories in which their mother was a fragile woman, undone by grief. The truth of what she had done at Turkey Creek was buried under silence and time. Kensington's shadow stretched long. His name appeared briefly in medical directories of the 1840s, then vanished. Rumors placed him in Mexico, experimenting on prisoners, or in South America under another name. None could prove it. He left behind only victims and theories. By the time of the Civil War, Willowbend itself was a ghost of its former grandeur. Sherman's troops burned the main house in 1864, leaving only brick columns and fragments of iron fence. After the war, the land was divided, sold to struggling Confederate veterans who plowed the soil unaware, or perhaps unwilling to admit, what lay beneath it. The name Willowbend faded from maps. But Turkey Creek remained. The bend where Cordelia had performed her rituals grew over with reeds and cypress. Freedmen living nearby refused to wash or fish there, saying the water carried sickness. They told their children the creek was cursed, that it had tasted human blood and would never run clean. Even white farmers avoided the spot, claiming the air grew heavy and silent as you approached, that the birds refused to sing. The land remembered what men chose to forget. Decades passed. The story became rumor, then legend. In 1891, a farmer tilling former plantation soil unearthed a wooden box buried 3 feet deep. Inside were rusted instruments, broken glass vials, and scraps of paper stained by chemicals. The handwriting was faint, but legible enough to freeze the man's blood. He reburied the box that same day and never spoke of it again. His widow burned his journal after his death, saying only that some discoveries should stay buried.